So of course, we're here today to talk about all things polycystic ovarian syndrome, which has been aptly named almost incorrectly, because whenever we're talking about PCOS, it does not always have to present with cysts. That can be a symptom, can be a side effect, but there's a whole multitude of things that are going on whenever we have the disease of PCOS. And we're going to start uncovering and getting into the root cause here today. And so, to introduce ourselves, my name is Dylan Cersey. This is Eric Anderson. The vast majority of you guys know us already. But talk briefly a little bit about our stories, and then we'll hop into this thing here.
Yep, so how we got started, we actually met at a functional medicine facility. But before that, the reason why we got into this space at all, and the reason why we are so passionate about helping people get to the root cause of their issues, is because we both had our health taken away from us, and basically was told there was nothing we could do about it. And so for me, when I was 17, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease called Still's disease. And it's very similar to rheumatoid arthritis with how it affects the joints, but also affects the muscles, causes daily fevers, and I was having students help me walk from class to class because it was so debilitating. And when I finally got a diagnosis, I was very excited because I was like, all right, cool, a diagnosis means answers, which means a solution, and that's not what happened. They told me that there was really nothing I could do about it except for take this medication to suppress the symptoms. I would just be doing that for the rest of my life, and that they didn't know why I had gotten it, that it was probably genetic, even though no one in my family that I knew of had an autoimmune disease. And so I remember asking that even at that time at 17, is there anything I can do with my diet, my lifestyle that could help my symptoms? And I was told, no, there's nothing you can do. And I asked every rheumatologist I ever saw after that same question, and was always told no. And I didn't even think to look for the answer myself because the people in the white coat were saying no, so it must be true. And it wasn't until about 10 years later I was the bridesmaid in my sister's wedding, and I absolutely hated the way I looked in that dress. It was like a busted can of biscuits. I'm like, okay, this is the time to lose the weight. And started losing weight, hit a plateau, and was like, I need something to push me out of this plateau. What can I do? And I heard of this crazy thing called a Whole30 diet, where they eliminate all the processed foods and everything. And I was like, I'm going to do that because it's going to force me to eat super, super clean, not thinking it would help with my autoimmune symptoms. And what happened was 2 weeks later, my autoimmune symptoms completely disappeared for the first time in 10 years. And so that was the start of my journey. Went to my doctor 4 months later, off medication, and she was very upset with me. Told me I was going to ruin my joints because I was no longer on medication. Didn't see her after that, but went to the library and I found all these books on autoimmune diseases, and I found this one book called The Autoimmune Solution, and Dr. Amy Myers, explains the root cause of autoimmune diseases and how she treats her patients, which is exactly the solution I had found on my own. And that was kind of my light bulb moment of, this book had been out for 10 years. This wasn't new information, but this was the moment I remember sitting in that library and being like, I need to do something for the people who are out there like me, asking and wanting to take responsibility for their health and just being told, no, you can't have it. So that's what got me into becoming a health coach eventually, and then working at a functional medicine facility and meeting Dylan, and our values and everything align, and that's how we created Chronically Healthy.
I did. Now, on my side of the aisle, as far as the health scare, it lines up pretty closely, pretty similar to what happened with Erica. So I was 28 years old. I woke up one Sunday morning, couldn't walk, couldn't talk very well, and I pretty much decided that I was just going to the next day to go to the ER, or not to the ER, to my doctor, my PCP, because I was young and foolish and decided that it was just something that was off with my equilibrium. It would go away, much like any other experience I've ever had in my life. And so what I did is, the very next day, I go to the doctor, I walk into my PCP's office, and the PCP pretty much just dismisses me right on the spot because I presented healthy. At the time, I was doing a lot of jiu-jitsu, I was doing MMA, I was constantly in the gym, and I was overtraining my body, but I presented healthy, I looked healthy. And so I just got told it was crystals in my ears, that I needed to go to a physical therapist, they needed to do the Epley maneuver on my head, and that would clear up all my symptoms, and then I'd be back to health. So this goes on for about 6 weeks. So for about 6 weeks, I'm going to physical therapists, I'm seeing my PCP, I've gone to a couple of ear, nose, and throat specialists, and nothing is changing. I'm getting no relief, and I've just accepted pretty much at this point in time, I'm not going to be driving, I'm not going to be working very well, I'm just going to sit on the couch, I'm going to have to figure out what the rest of life is going to look like. And finally, I had a friend of mine reach out, a friend of mine from Nashville, and this person was a PA and said, hey, listen, Hail Mary, check your blood sugar levels. So I had somebody bring me a glucometer, I checked my blood sugar level, I'm sitting at 996. So, of course, I thought to myself, well, that's gotta be sugar on my finger, I'm gonna go wash my hands, do it again. Check it again, 1001. So this was another Saturday night, so I wasn't about to ignore that signal. So I go to the ER, after a couple of hours of getting poked and prodded, the doctor comes in, somber look on her face, and she says, hey, by the way, you're a type 1 diabetic, and I hate to be the one to tell you this, and we suspect that you've had a stroke. And so I go get the scans, sure enough, scarring in the left temporal lobe, confirming that there was a stroke that I'd had, and it was more than likely because of my undiagnosed type 1 diabetes that was that late onset. So once I get the diagnosis, I remember the doctor, she kind of looked at me like I was a little bit crazy. I smiled because I was like, okay, there's something. We can work with that. Let's go. And so then I started asking the question, because from there I started getting involved with the endocrinologist and my PCP, and get rid of that PCP and get a different one. And so I keep asking the question, what can I do? What am I responsible for here? And I kept being told nothing. Nothing is your responsibility. There's nothing you can do. There's nothing that you can own during this disease. It is just this medication, this disease, and your outlook on life is going to be kind of bleak. They were very nice about it, but they took all the responsibility away from me, which I accepted for a long period of time. But much like Erica, I just kind of fumbled into a podcast that started talking about functional medicine and talking about what you can do to reduce your inflammation and help your body to heal. So I was like, okay, I'll pull that string and look at it. So I started doing my own research. I started listening to more podcasts. I started reading more books. Turns out there's a lot that you can do for yourself. Within 3 months of that diagnosis, I started working within the realm of functional medicine on myself. And my aphasia from the stroke had completely gone away. I was back in the gym. I was back doing jiu-jitsu, doing MMA, playing sports, and there was no impairment to my speech whatsoever. You can hear me talking here today. But if I would have kept listening to the line that was being told for me, then I could still be, I guess we'll put it that way, I could still be suffering from the side effects of that stroke and my blood sugar levels being so elevated. So that's what led me down the road of saying, well, if I'm asking the question, then other people are asking that question as well. So if other people are asking the question, they're not getting answers, well, then it's somebody's responsibility to start doing this for people. So took it upon myself. Like Erica said, met her at the functional medicine facility in Knoxville, and then we decided to start doing our own thing. So here we are with Chronically Healthy. So that's a little bit about our story and why we do what we do. But without further ado, hopping into all things PCOS. It's a little bit of a smaller group here tonight, so let's keep it casual. If you guys have any questions, anything to add, any statements, please throw it at us. This does not have to be formal by any means. We want it to be interactive. Indeed. So PCOS is, of course, a myriad of symptoms. It's not just something that is to do with the ovaries and with cysts. There's multiple different things that are involved in PCOS, and it's not just a gynecological issue. It's a systemic problem that's happening here. So whenever we're talking about PCOS, we're going to be talking about the symptoms that we're going to be having with PCOS. We're going to have the facial hair. We're going to have the excess weight gain. We're going to have the higher testosterone levels. We can have lethargy. It can throw off other hormones within the body. And there's so many different things that are happening in the realm of PCOS.
All right, so the problem with the conventional way that they typically treat PCOS is just birth control. So we have young girls who are starting birth control about as soon as they start having a period, because it takes care of the symptoms. Those periods are awful, terribly painful, and so they're just like, give me anything to make this stop, and it does make it better, makes them lighter. But the problem with that is it doesn't address that root cause. And whenever you're covering a symptom and you're not addressing that root cause, you're basically going to keep perpetuating that problem. So what we see a lot of times is 15 years later, they're coming to us because it's like, I'm miserable. I'm miserable. I cannot lose this weight. I am in the gym all the time. I am eating all the right foods that I think I'm supposed to eat, and I cannot get this weight to move. And oh yeah, I'm also wanting to have kids, and I'm afraid I'm going to have problems having kids because of this. So this is why we want to talk about the problems with not addressing that root cause. And when we talk about functional medicine, everything is connected. So there's going to be some organ systems that we're going to talk about here that you're going to be like, why in the world, what does that have to do with, my ovaries? But it has a lot to do with it. Another thing is that birth control has a lot of other things come along with it, a lot of nutrient deficiencies that can happen, and it can actually make the root cause worse. So we will explain that in a couple of slides here, but that root cause that is causing all of these symptoms is actually being exacerbated by the birth control in the first place. All right.
So, to ask the question, what's the primary underlying cause of PCOS? Does anybody have any guesses?
It's
A, B.
thyroid.
Okay.
Yeah. Insulin resistance.
All right.
Insulin.
It's a cheat code. You
Got
don't
it.
need to rehearse it.
You got it.
Yep.
Yeah.
So it's going to be insulin resistance.
Although I will say the thyroid, we do talk about that because
Yeah.
they do go hand in hand, and so
heard
that yes, no, you were on it. It was a trick. It was a trick question there because yes, there is a connection there, but it's not the root cause. So yeah, you're on it.
So, insulin. So insulin resistance is going to be the crux of the issue that is known as PCOS. So with that insulin resistant state, first and foremost, let's talk about what insulin resistance truly is. With insulin resistance, what's happening here is pretty much picture insulin as the Uber driver. And so the Uber driver has picked up their passenger, the passenger being glucose. And the Uber driver is driving the glucose where it needs to go. So it shows up at the cell's door and it says, hey, I've got this passenger, it's yours now. But that house, that cell, has been given too many passengers and it doesn't have any more room. It says, I'm done. I've been over inundated with too much. So I'm going to have to deny you that ability to give me that glucose. And so what happens here is then another Uber driver shows up and another Uber driver shows up. We get more and more and more insulin trying to push glucose into the cell because that's one of its main jobs. It is going to take glucose from outside of the cell and it's going to hit the insulin binding site on the outside of the cell there, and it's going to open the gate to allow the glucose to come in, and then your mitochondria is going to use that to make your ATP and your ADP the energy for the cell so the cell can then work. But what happens is, once again, that mitochondria is being over inundated with too much glucose. And now this can come from multiple different places. The vast majority of us have a relatively healthy diet, especially in this day and age. A lot of us are really focusing on our figures, we're focusing on our health. It's kind of front of mind. But that being said, it doesn't have to just come from diet. Now that's going to be the biggest lever you can pull to cause insulin resistance. It's going to be a diet that is higher in carbs, higher in processed foods, higher in toxins, higher in poisons that we're putting in, causing more of that inflammation. But it can also come from a place of stress, higher cortisol. It can come from a place of poor sleep. So there's multiple different places that we can become insulin resistant from, as opposed to just thinking it's only a blood glucose issue or it's only a sugar problem. It is the hormone that is insulin, just entirely too much inside of the body, and that mitochondria being overburdened with too much of essentially sugar. So with insulin, it's also going to be a signaling hormone. And so it being signaling, what it's going to do, and this is what's going to drive up your testosterone, is it's going to signal to your ovaries to make more of the androgens. And that's going to be those male testosterone molecules. Heavens if I can find my English here, but more of that testosterone. And so that's going to be what drives a lot of that facial hair growth, and where we start to lose a lot of that hair on the top of our scalp. That's going to be coming from overabundance of that testosterone. We all are going to have testosterone, which is great for us, but for a female, they should have significantly less than what a male has. And then just kind of a fun fact, for the men in our families, the opposite of that happens with fat. So if a man has more fat, they're going to produce more estrogen than testosterone because of those fat cells producing the opposite of the androgens, essentially. So that's going to be as far as the testosterone goes, just insulin talking to the ovaries then producing more of the androgens instead of the estrogens. And then from there, we have to talk about your sex hormone binding globulins. Hey, I got it right the first time. But with those SHBGs, I always want to switch to B and the G there. With those, what happens is whenever we have too much insulin, those are going to be driven down. We're not going to have the ability to make as many of those. And so those are going to be utilized for testosterone and many other hormones to be taken out of the body. But insulin is going to blunt your body's ability to be able to use those and make those for you to then drive down that testosterone, to be able to take it out of the body. So multiple different ways that insulin is playing into the PCOS state here. Any questions thus far? Perfect. And so as you can see on the slide behind me here, it's a vicious cycle. Insulin resistance starts the cascade, the myriad of symptoms that then becomes the PCOS. But then the PCOS will make the insulin resistance worse. And so it's just this vicious cycle that you have to find that stopping point for and figuring out where the root cause of the crux of the issue is, that is the insulin elevating and causing, of course, the issues inside of the ovaries. But eventually what will happen is you'll probably get to a pre-diabetic state, then to a diabetic state if you don't handle the insulin resistant state. It might take a few years, but that can be a long-term outcome for the individuals that do have PCOS.
And this is where that when the birth control can be more harmful than anything, because they're focusing on the wrong hormones to fix, right? They're trying to fix your female hormones, and the female hormones are out of whack because of insulin. And birth control actually makes you more insulin resistant. So they've done studies to prove that. So the root cause is insulin resistance. Then you take birth control, and it makes that even worse. Just adds fuel to that fire. And something too is we hear a lot about insulin resistance, and we think of like diabetes and prediabetes and that sort of thing. And that is the late stages of insulin resistance. And most people don't know that they're insulin resistant because they're not testing for it. They're testing that blood sugar, and they're testing the A1C, which is also just the blood sugar. And your insulin is probably going to be doing, like you said, it takes years to get to that diabetic state. Insulin does a really, really good job of keeping that blood sugar where it's supposed to be. Your body prioritizes getting that blood sugar, that glucose, where it needs to go, or else you end up like Dylan, and no one wants that. Oh, sad Dylan. But that's the body has certain priorities, and so that's why when it just starts forcing those cells to try to take up glucose by bringing that insulin up, that's when you get the cascade effect that he's talking about there.
I did. And also one last little sidebar for insulin, it is the fat storage hormone. So whenever we have insulin resistance, it's going to be what's driving a lot of that glucose, this glycogen, into those fat cells, and it will not allow you to relinquish the hold on that. So that's why a lot of times whenever we have PCOS, we also have a very difficult time of losing weight. We can look at a cupcake and we can throw on a love handle, but as far as losing the weight, we can go to the gym for 9 months, a year, and maybe lose a pound. And it's all because the hormone's high. Your other hormone there, glucagon, is low. And that's going to be, we want the inverse of that in order to relinquish the hold on energy inside of the body. But that's it as far as the insulin part of this thing goes, but that's the underlying crux of the problem. It's not that your ovaries are the issue here, they're a victim of insulin resistance.
And that's why PCOS has been called diabetes of the ovaries, or insulin resistance of the ovaries. So it is becoming more well known, thankfully, even among some conventional doctors. It's slowly getting out there that this is the root cause. More and more people are hearing about it, but for a lot of women, that's about 15 years since they've been on birth control. So it's a long time to be fueling that problem. So hopefully things start changing, but yeah.
Do you find it's just with hormonal birth control, or is it also with like the copper, like non-hormonal IUD?
So the copper shouldn't cause, according to the studies, it was hormonal birth control that they were testing. The only problem I've seen or heard of with the copper is Dr. Catherine Height. She said she had a patient that had a horrible reaction to the copper, and like within a couple of days of having it, implanted, she was really sick. So there's still side effects in it that can make you sick, but as far as making PCOS worse, I haven't seen the studies on that. So the functional medicine difference, that's what we want to talk about, is like getting to that root cause. And everything is connected in the body. Nothing is in isolation. So when we are trying to work on a chronic illness, work on health in general, we want to make sure that we are supporting all the systems that are involved. And so that's what we're going to be going through here. So we're going to touch on the thyroid and that connection. We're going to touch on the gut and that connection, the diet, the stress, the sleep. All of these are important. And then also what kind of testing should you look for to be able to see how you can get to that root cause a little more for you. So first of all, with nutrition, because with the root cause is insulin resistance, we want to focus on whole foods, nutrient dense, and lower in carb. So if you think about your macros, your fat and your carbs are energy sources. Protein's more that building block. It can kind of be used as energy in some cases, but if you think of basically like a teeter-totter, when it comes to the macros, you want fat on one side, carbs on the other, protein is that fulcrum in the middle. You don't ever want a diet that is both high in fat, high in carbs. That's the standard American diet. That's how we get to being really, really sick. So when we're talking about energy, there's a couple of different ways some people can lose weight. You can do a low-fat diet, and people have been able to lose weight that way. Or you can do low carb, and they lose weight. Why is that? It's because they're changing their energy source. With PCOS, we really want to change that energy source so that we are doing low carb, high fat. That is going to help with, like he was talking about before, really that's the biggest lever in helping reduce that insulin resistance, is not adding more glucose to the problem here. So focusing on good fats, avocados, olive oils, nuts, wild-caught fish. We are a big fan of animal fats, so tallow is a great thing as well. Ghee, they can actually withstand heat really, really well. So when you're cooking, we actually prefer to cook with those type of oils. And then also when you're choosing your vegetables, you want to go for the more leafy, less starchy type vegetables. And then of course, avoiding processed foods, avoiding the seed oils, anything that can cause inflammation. Inflammation can actually drive insulin resistance as well. They did a study in Israel where one of the ways they tested how people, if they had intolerances to food, was actually checking their blood sugar after eating the food. So these were foods that were not supposed to spike the blood sugar, but if it did in you, that was actually a sign that your immune system was being activated, causing an inflammation and driving up the stress in your body. So it's really interesting.
And to piggyback off what Erica said, inflammation and the immune system, it's the same word.
Mm-hmm.
There is no inflammation without your immune system being active. And so if we feel inflamed, if we have a meal and we eat a food or foods and we start having bloating, that shouldn't happen. Whenever you eat, there should be absolutely zero bloating. You shouldn't feel your intestines at all hours of the day. That should be an organ system that you do not feel. If you can feel that, then there's probably some inflammation going on in the system, which, to exactly what Erica was saying, is going to exacerbate the issues that are surrounding insulin resistance and the PCOS state. So now on to, this is a fun one, stress. So who here is not stressed? Exactly. So everybody's stressed. But what happens here is, just like we were talking about insulin and glucagon earlier, your body's going to prioritize one hormone over a different hormone. So whenever we are in a stress state, our body is going to have one response and one response only. It's just how strong the response is. So what can happen here, and what our body is perceiving, is you are seeing a stress. We'll say that it's a bear that's chasing you. You see the bear, your body is then going to jump the adrenaline and jump the cortisol out of your adrenal glands. And it's going to say, hey, we need to get going because this thing's going to kill us. We perceive the danger. So what happens inside of our GI tract, we have vasoconstriction. And inside of course, with our sex hormones, the same thing's going to happen. Or with our sex organs, the same thing's going to happen. Because the body is not going to prioritize reproduction or digestion whenever you're about to get eaten by a bear. But what also happens here is your body ramps up its glucose. Your liver is going to put out its glycogen stores because now we have to fuel the big muscle groups in order to get away from the bear. We've got to give the muscles all the energy in the world. So we're going to have vasodilation in your big muscle groups, vasoconstriction in our other organ systems that don't need as much blood flow right now because we're not prioritizing that. So what that does is, if we were actually running from a bear, that's a beautiful system. But the vast majority of the time, we're just sitting at our desk getting an email from our boss or some other stimulus, and it's making us really stressed, and we're not utilizing that energy whatsoever. So then on the back end of that, insulin has to be produced via the pancreas in order to get that energy back into the cell or out of the system. So then we have jumped all of that energy into the system. We've released from the liver all of those glycogen stores in the form of that glucose for the muscle cells to use, but we don't activate the muscles. And so that's going to be the response we have to any stress. It's just the perception of how stressful the situation is how much that happens. But that's with any single stress that we have, whether it's a child that's hurting, whether it's an evil email, whether it actually is the bear that's chasing you, regardless of what it is, that's going to be the response. And that's how stress is going to drive up your insulin, which then perpetuates the insulin resistant state, which then of course is linked right there to the PCOS.
Yeah, and this is really, we have worked with people who are pre-diabetic or diabetic, and we can tell when we retest on their labs if they're following the diet and they're doing really good, but things are not moving as fast as we would expect. It's stress in their life every single time. What's interesting about insulin resistance is the insulin marker and everything. Is it diet? Is it stress? Is it lack of sleep? We don't know. But later on in the labs, there's triglycerides, and those pretty much tell on you if it's the diet, because they'll go up with carbs. So we can usually tell if it is stress driving this insulin resistance or not. But it does prevent people from hitting their goals. The needle will move a little bit, with diet and everything, but that stress, and it's because our muscles, like in that explanation he was talking about, our muscles have a cheat code. Our muscles can uptake that glucose without insulin having to tell it to. So when you're stressed and your body's trying to prepare you to really fight or run or whatever you need to do, it's because it's expecting your muscles to need that energy, and then you just are sitting there. And so that's the problem. Our bodies are really, really smart, but they are they have programs that were really, really useful a few hundred years ago, a couple thousand years ago, not as useful today in this modern society. So, yeah.
Indeed. So we can't stress enough on stress,
Yeah.
because it really will hamper all of health. You can be doing everything right, but you've left stress in there, and it can stop everything.
Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to looking at root causes, one of the reasons why this root cause is not normally found for most people is because they're not testing for the right things. So with functional testing, there's a couple of reasons why you're able to get to that root cause. First of all, we're going to look at your fasting insulin, because your glucose could be normal, your A1C could be beautiful, but that's because insulin is really, really high, forcing those cells to take that glucose in anyway. And we have seen that before. So, in this illustration here, that fasting insulin is at 30, which is very high. Fasting glucose would have been in the standard range. So there is a difference between the optimal range and the standard range. Standard range is when you go, what most conventional doctors will use. It is what is considered the average of what is normal for the general population. And the general population is sick, so you're being compared to sick people. And so you can see those ranges are wider. And so her fasting glucose wouldn't have popped on a standard test. A1C is beautiful in the optimal range. Average glucose is beautiful, but that fasting insulin is sky high. And they normally don't draw that anyway. So this could be going on for years without her knowing and causing a lot of issues down the line. And other testing as well can be very helpful. So you were talking about thyroid. Common thing with this is that it affects and causes low thyroid. And that's because insulin has an effect on every organ in the body. Every single cell in the body has insulin receptors. And so it will actually start affecting the thyroid's ability. And you'll see things like low T3. You'll also see low T3 as well if the gut is having issues. because that conversion from T4 to T3 is happening in the gut. And so sometimes gut testing is important as well to figure out what's really going on, to get a good look at the gut microbiome. When there's high glucose, chronically high glucose, or the insulin resistant state happening, a lot of times that will affect the microbiome. It's also a vicious cycle thing. So insulin resistance will make the bad guys more prolific. The bad gut bugs in your gut, they really, really love sugar. So they're going to just thrive, and that's going to cause an imbalance in your gut microbiome. It's going to be causing a lot of issues. When your gut's not working as well, you're not able to get rid of the excess estrogen. So that's another thing that can start disrupting the female hormones as well and causing the PCOS from causing the PCOS to get worse as well. So you want a plan that's going to look at all of those things to be able to support. Yes, hit that root cause, target the root cause as much as possible, and then also support these other organs as well to make sure you're getting the most benefit.
Mm-hmm. If you're a provider, if the first question that isn't asked, or the first few questions that are asked whenever you say, hey, I'm presenting with symptoms of PCOS, or the doctor comes in and says, hey, you have PCOS, if the first questions aren't how's your diet, how's your sleep, and how's your stress, then you might want to look at going elsewhere for your health care. Because insulin resistance is 100% reversible. Type 2 diabetes is 100% reversible. You just have to figure out what's going on with that insulin at the base and the crux of the problem. Now then, as far as, and to add off the fasting insulin here, 5, 24.9. That's a massive jump. The difference between 5 and 24.9 can be up to a decade and a half. So anything above 5 is showing an insulin resistant state. And so you could be suffering for a decade and a half before, even if they do pull the fasting insulin, finally look at it. If it's under 24.9, they don't really mind too much because it's in that normal range. But you're still suffering with the issues of diabetes. Essentially, it's just the baby form of diabetes in the insulin resistant pre-diabetic state.
Yeah, I kind of hit it, I guess, on the last slide as well. But that diet that we were talking about, the low carb, focusing on fat as an energy source, that's going to be the key. Figuring out what foods are inflammatory for you, because as we were talking about before, inflammation can also be causing insulin resistance as well. So if you're having gut issues and you have a leaky gut, we need to figure out what those food triggers are. You want to have good sleep hygiene. We haven't touched on that as much, but with your sleep, an interesting fun fact is that one night of poor sleep can make you as insulin resistant as a type 2 diabetic the next day. Yeah.
I get bad sleep every night.
Oh no!
That chronic bad sleep, which it's a survival mechanism because your body's looking for energy because you didn't get it from your sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's trying to uptake more energy, but that's also driving up the insulin, which is then perpetuating the insulin resistant state.
Yeah. So some good sleep hygiene techniques, just making sure that your room is completely dark, that's a big thing. Making sure that about an hour before bed, try to turn off some of the screens. Try your best not to be scrolling on your phone in bed. That blue light coming from your phone, from the TV, it's signaling to your brain that it's still daylight out, it's not time to go to sleep, and it doesn't allow that melatonin to rise like it's supposed to. Making sure it's very, very cool in the house. You can take a hot shower or hot bath before bed, and that will actually make your body overcompensate to cool you down. Yes, so then it could be cooling you up. So that could be very helpful. Reading a book, preferably like an actual book instead of a screen, can help you calm down as well. And just having a set routine every night. We're basically just big babies. Like when you have your kids, you always have that same routine. It helps them and their brains start to go, okay, it's time to go to bed. We need to keep doing that as adults as well. Give ourselves a bath, read ourselves a story, like same thing. And if you have the same routine every night, it will trigger your brain and go, okay, it's time to relax. The day is over. I need to go to sleep. So. Yeah.
And then to piggyback off that, at minimum, blue light blocking glasses.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have to be on our screens before we go to bed, at least put on some blue light blocking glasses to start shutting that signal off to the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, easy as that.
Yep, and then of course stress management, like we talked about, and along with that is not over exercising. And I think a lot of women get stuck on this because you're trying to lose weight, and so that's the only thing you've been told to do is like just work out more. You must not be doing it right. Work out some more. Work out some more, and that could actually be increasing your stress even more, which is perpetuating the insulin resistance state again. So this also goes hand in hand with thyroid issues too. Like when those two go together, a lot of times women are over exercising and making those issues a lot worse. We can't, believe it or not, we can't do everything a man can, unfortunately. We just can't push ourselves the same way men can, all right? It's just how it is.
The testosterone is quite the cheat.
We all hate you. I'm just kidding.
It's okay, babe. I love you.
Thank you. One vote of confidence in the crowd.
But that is our PCOS presentation. If you're wanting more help personally, we can help you out with that. We can help you with getting some testing. We help create personalized care plans for you. Our doctors look over the labs, create personalized care plans for you. We're going to help you figure out your food triggers, develop your personalized diet, and just in general, having personal coaches at your side to help you through this process can be very, very helpful because there's a lot when it comes to lifestyle changes. So we're here for accountability, guidance, education. We love the education part, as you can tell. So
The overarching goal of Chronically Healthy is to take your health and hand it back to you as the individual. You should be in control of your health. It's not so complex that you can't understand what's going on and that you can't be in control and keeping this thing working well. It should be yours to have and no one else's to control.
Yeah. And that's it.
Yes, thank you guys.
Thank you.